Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children. So I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Welcome back to the OT is In podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Collins, and today is an exceptionally important episode. It is something that may provoke anxiety and fear even to think about, which actually makes it even more important. We're talking about preparing for emergencies, whether it's hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, fires, or any other expected events. This preparedness is important for all families, but even more important for families where big changes evoke obstacles and barriers. Katie Hamlin Pacheco pulls on her expertise as a former educator, occupational therapist, and wife of a Coast Guard pilot to define these terms, obstacles and barriers, and also to provide tips to work around these obstacles so they do not become barriers to safety. Katie shares how to consider sensory sensitivities and create a sensory-safe evacuation planner tailored for your family, including packing lists and planning strategies that can truly make a difference when disaster strikes. So grab a pen and notepad because today's episode is packed with essential information that could help to save lives. Don't forget, all resources and the planner are available on Katie's websites, linked in the show notes here. In episodes 25 through 28, you will hear us touch on response inhibition and the many ways the skill is required. Safety awareness in play, and especially on screens. You'll also hear some ways to help build the skill, like in equine therapy, and you'll hear how to prepare for an emergency or a disaster. Preparations are important for all, but require more emphasis when considering sensory needs and executive functioning skills. If any of these resonate with you, there's an additional resource at Homeschool OT. We've made a games list so you can be intentional about adding fun to your homeschool day, knowing that you're also addressing executive functioning skills. You can find this in the Homeschool OT shop or in the show notes for each of these episodes. And for further support in the area of executive functioning, we have the Executive Functioning Focus Group. This is a month-long deep dive into each of the 11 executive functioning skills. Each week, you'll have bite-sized chunks to grow your understanding, but also how to help build the skills, adjust the environment to support your children, and even ways to adapt activities. After all, we want our expectations to match our children's abilities. For those of you worried about dedicating a month to this topic, don't worry. You have lifetime access, so you can come back as your time allows or as your child develops and you need to, again, match your expectations to their new abilities. So you can find out more about the focus group at homeschoolot.com, or more specifically, homeschoolot.com/shop/executive-function-focus-group. Now, on with the show. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In. So I have my friend Katie here today, who we just actually met, but realized we went to the same graduate school and we've been having just the best discussions. So I'm excited to share her with you. So Katie, other than being a fantastic VCU alumni, a little bit about yourself and how you got to be doing what you're doing.
Yes, I was a teacher before becoming an occupational therapist. So I taught in an elementary classroom and a middle school classroom and loved it, but I found that a lot of the things that I was doing as I grew as a teacher was very OT-ish. And I just had this opening to go back to school. And so I did. And I've been so thankful. It is, OT is the best profession in the world, but I'm biased.
I
Um,
agree.
and so I have morphed this teacher and OT piece. I think when I went back to school, I was projecting that it would be, I used to be a teacher and now I'm an OT. But how they say once a teacher, always a teacher, I think is incredibly true. So I've gotten to morph my teaching background into my OT work. And it has been so much fun.
I love that. I love that. And now you have taken I would say, a more interesting path as far as OT goes and how you're applying it now. So tell us a little bit more about what you do now.
So I have a program called the Brain Executive Program. So as that elementary and middle school teacher, one of the things that I really loved the best from some teaching research is that when we're going to explain something really complex to kids, if we start with everyday language before we move into our science language, it's their learning just increases because we meet them where they
Where they
are.
are.
Yes. And I say to everyone, I accidentally have ended up working in sensory integration. I didn't mean to, and it was my first job, and I love it. So as a practitioner, I got tons of kids with sensory processing challenges, and overlapping that, I would get a lot of some executive functioning challenges and some anxiety challenges. And so I started teaching these kids about their brains and how their brain
Mm.
works. And there's so much right now for adults, but I didn't find it exactly like I wanted as a therapist. So I started making this program. So we actually did my first book. I'm so excited. It's called,
So-
Yes, How to Be a Brain Executive and Get Sensory Sharp. And what it does is it explains sensory modulation to kids. So I have what I call the brain security team, and it's a little security team that lives inside your body and your brain, and they're who regulates, who gets the sensory information that gets to your brain. And then if they let in too much, or if they don't let in enough, then we can go from there and learn how to help your brain security team. So I'm so excited about that program, and I laugh. I wrote the book for kids. And I tried to make it entertaining for kids. So I like to say if Diary of a Wimpy Kid wrote a neuroscience book, I
Ooh,
hope
I
this is what it
love
would
it.
sound like because we know that kids learn best when they're in play and they're highly engaged. So I didn't want it to read like a textbook, but adults have really liked it, which always makes me giggle, but I love it. And so we've rolled right into some adult, like parent teacher education pieces that I have online. So that's where I've been.
I think that's so amazing. We just talked not too long ago with Dr. Victoria Dunkley here, who wrote Reset Your Child's Brain and is talking a lot about the impact of screens on a brain and stuff. And
Yes,
as a family, we did a screen fast leading up to that. We were
that's
doing it
great.
anyway, but then I was like, Dr. Dunkley, we did this because of your book.
Yeah.
So you have to come in and talk about it. So it was such
Yeah.
an awesome conversation. If you guys have not listened to that one, jump back to that
Yeah.
episode. I will make sure it's linked in the show notes. But where I'm going with this is that one of the most important pieces of that screen fast with my own children was that they needed to understand the why first.
Our
Because,
kids are
yeah,
wired to know, they want to know why.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Even if you think about young kids, what they ask at the beginning, why, I
Yes,
think, I don't know if the statistic is actually true, but I remember a statistic of the average 4-year-old asks why 400 times a day.
I believe it.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
what you're saying just resonates so much of let's explain to our children and give them the underlying why so that we can
Mhm.
help to work through with them.
Yes. And it
So
empowers
beautiful.
them. Then they're not always reliant on us or whatever adult that is. Um, because, and I'll say, I was a teacher, I'm a pediatric therapist. So I work with kids and I always have, but I always try to keep in the forefront of my mind our kids are one day adults. And
Mm,
so we have to be so careful about what we do now is preparing them to be independent adults. An adult, I manage my sensory preferences. So, yeah, I think meeting them and explaining it to them, and kids just understand more than I think we give them credit for. Can they understand neuroscience? Yes, they can, and they
yeah.
can use it.
Even when we're thinking about interoception, understanding
Right.
all this, we have to understand what's going on inside of our body. So if we can give the why, then
Mhm.
it's easier to then be able to say, oh, this is what's happening inside of my
Mhm.
body. Oh,
Right,
I
right.
love this so much. Now,
Yeah.
some of your other main research is focused on safety planning for emergencies, right? Because you take this into the everyday life. That's actually what
Yes.
your website says, which I loved so much. In fact, it said specialize in translating the science of sensory processing and integration in a way that improves everyday life. And I was like,
Yes.
yeah.
Yay. If it doesn't fit into everyday life, then why are we doing it? Yeah. So this evacuation planner piece is a whole nother offshoot of where I've been working. My husband used to be a Navy helicopter pilot, and we transitioned over into the Coast Guard about the time that I became an OT. And we were down in Florida, and I was working as a sensory OT, so lots of kids. And at the same time, he was working as a Coast Guard helicopter pilot, which means that when there's a natural disaster, when it's happening or after, he's on those teams that go in and try to help the people who couldn't or didn't evacuate. And so that was some of my families that needed to plan for evacuate and the evacuation. And then I realized there's so many families. So I created the sensory safe evacuation planner that kind of just lives at that intersection of being an OT and our family lives natural disaster
Yeah.
preparedness. It's what we do. And I realized with some of my families that I like to say it like this: if you have a child because of their sensory patterns has a hard time going to a birthday party or the grocery store or a religious service or participating in school, how much harder is an
Oh,
evacuation going to
yeah.
be? Whether you're going to a local shelter or a small hotel room with your 9 closest family members, or your great Aunt Irma's house with her ancient tea sets that you can't knock down. And what I found is that those are all obstacles. So we can talk about obstacles, but at some point, if we're not careful, obstacles become barriers. And if
Mm,
you imagine what is an obstacle, it's something that's difficult, but that I can do it, maybe with some help, maybe with some preparation. But what is a barrier? A barrier is a stopping point. So I made this planner to hope that we can talk to families and get a plan for an evacuation. We can't make an evacuation easy. They're always stressful and
right.
they're always inconvenient and they're always challenging. But can we prevent those obstacles from becoming barriers? And can we empower families with the ability to evacuate? So that's the purpose of that planner.
I love that language and the way that you've explained it, the difference in obstacles and barriers, and how even we can use that with our children. So, can you give some examples of how to make a barrier more of an obstacle and how a parent would use that tool?
Yes. Would it be okay if I talk you through the planner? Because I
I
think
would
that
love that.
translates.
Yep.
Okay.
And we will make sure that's linked as well in the show notes.
Perfect. And I should say that this planner is available at no cost to use, to share, because, being able to afford a resource is just another obstacle. So this is available if you're a family, you can get on and use it at no cost. So the planner steps you through the process. At the top of the planner, you just outline your child's sensory characteristics. So the first one is more about sensory modulation. So my child is over responsive or under responsive or seeks, and then what type of sensory input: visual input or auditory input, proprioception. And then the second box is about praxis or those motor based challenges. So
Mm.
it's just a yes or no. My child has sensory motor based challenges, or a no. As a parent and as a clinician, I love these two boxes because as a clinician, when I use this, if I hand this planner to a parent that I've been working with, a family that I've been working with, and they can't outline their child's sensory characteristics, then I know that I haven't done my job because I never want to be the power holder. My job is to teach you to be the power holder. I love those top two boxes for a couple reasons, but what it lets us do is say, okay, this is the child's sensory characteristics. And then the very next part says, where are you probably going to evacuate to? Is it a
Well,
local shelter?
can I
Is it a
back you up
hotel?
actually for one
Yeah.
second before that?
Yes.
So what would you say to parents if they come and download this? So
Mhm.
a lot of the listeners here aren't in occupational therapy full time, or
Yep.
no one's in occupational therapy full time at this point. This does not need to be a 40 hour week job, but they are not in direct occupational therapy at this point.
Mhm.
So if parents are having a hard time filling that out, or they're like, I don't actually know this, what are some steps that they could take to know how to fill that out or think through?
Yes, great question. If you are in occupational therapy at the moment with your child, or if you have been and you don't feel confident answering those questions, I would ask your therapist. As a teacher, we get to test and then
Mm.
we understand what, to some extent, what you know or don't know. But as a clinician, please tell me if you don't understand. So I would say if you're in therapy right now and you can't answer those, ask, and that's okay. But definitely reach out. If you're not, I'm actually doing this series for teachers right now, and I call it drive-by teaching. As a teacher, I would say if you throw out a bunch of facts and you keep going and you never slow down, you just work drive-by teaching and it doesn't work. And I love, love, love how much sensory processing is in just mainstream right now. But
Mhm.
I find that there's so many like a fact about this, and here's this tidbit, and here's a strategy. And you can get all of those and they might work, but if you don't build your foundation of understanding, it's not going to all come together. So there are some great resources to do that as a parent. And also reach, if you think that your child has some sensory processing challenges, you can reach out to a local OT clinic. You can even, I think people don't know this, you can just call a clinic and say, hey, these are some things that are happening. Is this something that I could come in for? Often we offer free screenings. Come in for 15 minutes. We'll chat, we'll take a look, and we'll say, hey, maybe we should do an eval. So I would say find an OT and reach out, or in the very least, find some kind of a solid framework of building that understanding. Is that an okay
Yep,
way to
I
answer
think
your
that's
question?
fantastic. I would add in there, as when we are observing our own children and becoming a student of our student, I think you'd be surprised at how much you do know about your
Yeah.
child, and about when
Yes.
you think about where you're going, where they do have these, not the barriers, but do have the obstacles, and
Mhm.
what is happening during there, what is happening, what they have to see, what they have to touch, what they have to taste, and see if
Mhm.
there's any patterns to go along there. And as far as homeschool OT, we have the sensory balanced homeschool, which provides information about every single one of those senses too. That could be a
Awesome.
great resource if you don't know how to fill out that top box for your child. Okay,
Yes.
so let's
And
move on.
perfect. Yes.
You know,
We could talk all
after,
day.
yeah, right. So after
uh,
that top program or
yes.
top box, what's next?
Okay, so after you have these are my child's sensory characteristics, then the next is where are you likely to evacuate to? And it's just an open space. And I know that we don't always know, but that idea, a local shelter, a hotel, a relative's home, where would you expect to? And then the next part is a brainstorm about your obstacles. So then you say, okay, these are my kids' sensory characteristics. This is where I think we're going to go. What do I think is going to be hard? And you just write them down. And I encourage everyone to just brainstorm as much as they can. And if you're having a hard time, think about if you're taking your child to the grocery store or a birthday party, those types of everyday things. What are those sensory based challenges? And just write them down. And because then the next part of the planner, then we list out strategies. Okay, now I see what's hard. What can I do? And I like that we've listed the location because then we can have strategies that we can do in that place. If your child really likes to swing and that's regulating for them, you probably can't pack your swing if you're going to a hotel room. What can you bring? What tools can you have? And if we have time, we can go through some examples or we have resources for that. And then the final part is a packing list. When you have your ideas, what do you need to bring with you? If you're going to use the hotel pool, bring a swimming suit. That if
Mhm.
your child needs those sound
Headphones, yeah.
canceling
Mhm,
headphones,
mhm.
pack them because we know that during periods of stress, our brains are not working at their best. And so we want you to have this written down and the packing list, put it in your kit so that if a hurricane's coming or a wildfire or a flood or whatever's happening in your area, you pull the list out, you say, oh, yeah, these are my strategies. I need to pack these things, and you just bring it with you. And I will say, I like using the planner for kind of two big reasons. One is because you come out with a plan and you're empowered. I can evacuate, we
Mhm.
can do this. The second is that I think a lot of times as humans, as we're thinking about a problem, we envision the monster and then we stop and we never get
Yes.
past, we never get to details, and then we never get to what could we do about it. So I created the planner in a way that we bring you to those obstacles. We say, yep, let's talk about it. What's going to be tough? But then we keep walking you through, okay, but what could we do about this? And hopefully you're getting specific, not just my kid will run around for 24 hours a day. But wait, what exactly are they going to do? What will they be doing? What do they need? Because then we can try to provide that. And I would say, just because we talked about asking for help, if you're a parent listening to this and you have access to an occupational therapist, print it out and bring it and ask them for help because they should specialize in helping you think of those strategies.
That's so great. Before we go on, I want to take a second to thank you for being here. Many of you started listening to the OT is In podcast after hearing some of my sessions during the convention season in June. I am so thrilled that you are all here, and I so appreciated your feedback. One person, after attending my session, Help, My Child Won't Sit, gave feedback to the Virginia convention saying, I wish we had more time with her. This was such a blessing. Well, here I am. And another person said, I loved the tips and tricks. I can always use more. So here's another tip, especially for those of you whose children learn better with the ability to move. We've used CTC Math for a few years now. Each lesson is short and engaging, allowing for movement before and likely after. One of my sons completes his math lessons after completing his chores, which provide him with the pushing, pulling, carrying, or crawling, all the activities we OTs call proprioceptive feedback or heavy work. Then he sits on a sit disc or on a balance ball, and since all lessons are online, he moves wherever he feels the most comfortable. He's engaged in the lesson, and then a short time later is up and moving again with a better understanding of math. So if you're looking for short yet effective, colorful, engaging lessons, CTC Math is a perfect addition to your homeschool. Now, back to the show. One of my favorite things that you've talked about, you've mentioned frequently about how you're helping to prepare the child's brain because in a disaster and emergency, we're not working at our best, right? And assuming in
Right.
that way. But one of the other things that I've noticed as you've been talking about this, even thinking of me as a parent, if there's an emergency and I'm also worried about how do I get my kid where they need to be,
Yes.
there's not a chance I'm going to think through all of those things I need to pack. In fact, this morning I was like getting my work done and stuff, and my kids were ready to go. And
Yeah.
so I just walked out and got in the car. We were going to a creek. We didn't bring their water shoes. We didn't bring
Yeah.
I packed a lunch. We didn't bring their nets to catch fish. And that was
Yes.
not an emergency. It was just a transition of an activity.
Yes.
So this guidance of thinking through what should I pack can
Mhm.
really alleviate that in the moment and for our own brains.
Yes, I hope so. And there's this really great research. Amy Arnston has done this phenomenal research about that. I call it in my program your thinking brain, that prefrontal cortex, but about how even in mild stress, it doesn't work as well. The best time to plan for a disaster is, on a day where you're calm and there's not a disaster on the
Love
horizon.
it. Yep.
And it's if you have this plan and you never use it, fantastic. But I bet you can still use those strategies when you go on vacation.
Mhm.
So it's still a good process to think through.
Yes, and we also were chatting before this. So here in Pennsylvania, and this is not the same in every state, every homeschooling state, but here in Pennsylvania, we have to do a fire safety plan every year as part of our homeschool, our home
And
portfolio.
I love that is
Yes.
phenomenal.
So every year it's been what are we going to do this year? Like we've been to the firehouse, so we've seen what the equipment's going to look like and things like that. That is important. That can be a barrier that actually I think might be important for people to think about, even
Mhm,
noticing who's going to come to my door
mhm,
if in the case of a fire, because
mhm.
those big giant suits and helmets and
They're scary.
tanks are scary, right? So
Yes.
one way to hop over that obstacle and make it not a barrier is to go and see it and when you
Mhm,
are safe and comfortable. So we've done that. We've done we have a ladder. So we have a second story, or we have 3 stories, like where my kids would have to get out if they needed to,
mhm.
but 3 stories. So we've tried the ladder.
That's
It's
fantastic.
scary.
Yeah, it is, I'm
But-
sure. I was
right?
a little nervous just hearing you.
Yes.
Great.
Tried that. And we never had to use that ladder, but my son did. He was riding on his dirt bike one day and his dirt bike caught on fire and he had to do the stop, drop and roll off.
Wow.
When I look back at pictures of it now, I can see his arms completely black and singed.
Wow.
They're scary to look at the pictures.
Mhm.
He was totally fine. He did the exact right thing. He
Oh,
jumped off,
amazing.
he rolled, he came running in. We called the fire department. Everything worked out. Okay, dirt bike, not so much, but
But that's okay.
yes, yes. But I think this plan, just putting it really specifically, laying it out with our kids, that's a really important part of the homeschool as well.
I love that you guys planned for that. And I think too, and bringing a sensory lens to some of this is I think our parents, if you can think of the middle of the night and your fire alarm goes off,
Mhm.
if you have a child who's over responsive to auditory information, what is that going to do? And what might they do? And I know we can't plan for
Right.
everything, but I hope that by talking about this, the first, if it ever happens, it's not the first time that you've thought about it.
Yeah.
And I think again, back to that process of planning, don't we envision these big obstacles. I like these big monsters because they are scary. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen in the middle of the night? What's my child going to
Right.
do? Hide under the bed? How can I find them? But don't stop there. Think through, be specific, which is tough. But so stick there and be specific and then try to think of strategies. And I would say really reach out, whether it's to an OT on my website. I always try to say, I've made this planner. I try to share this planner. It doesn't mean that I'm an expert, but if you can't find anyone else, send an email and we can at least work to find you some resources because these things can happen and they do happen. And
Mhm.
the better prepared we are, the safer we are. I also like to say my husband's been a pilot in the military for 15 years. And so one of the things that they do so often is go through their kind of emergency routines. An engine goes out and they have all of these steps and they go over it and over it. And even if he's saying, because we practice them, if he's
Mhm.
saying them, he does the hand motions that he would do in the aircraft. The point is, and I would say I think military pilots are some of the most highly trained professions that we have, but the thing is, by doing this over and over, then when the emergency happens, just like your son, you built that in. So the
Mhm.
emergency happens and we know how to respond. And I think that's just it. You'd be amazed at what your brain can access in those moments if
Right.
you built it into place.
Yeah, yeah. So much of what we do in the homeschool world and educationally, what you're talking about is repeating the things that are important. We can't
Yeah.
just teach you about something one time and then expect that you can
Right.
access it in an emergency situation. So
Right.
to use this as a tool, one, to think through whatever those obstacles could be, two, to use it as a plan with your children and go through it to really think about if we had to use this ladder, how
Mhm.
would you get it on to the stairs and how would you climb down? Because a ladder that's moving is really
Hard.
difficult. And imagine for kiddos who are struggling with that motor planning
I was
or,
just about to go
yeah,
there. We're connected.
right.
Yes. For some of our kids, it's back to that piece obstacle. For some of our kids, that's an obstacle. For some of our kids, especially in an emergency when their brain's not going to
Yep.
be working at its best, if they have challenges with motor planning and execution, getting down a ladder could be a barrier. And so either can we learn that skill, or as a parent can do, is there another plan? Can we plan around it? Can we reroute? And again, all hard to do in the moment, but if we can think forward, then can we have those pieces in place if we need them one day?
That's so beautiful. And also, like, for all of you who are homeschooling and say, I'm not quite sure that my child could do what I need them to do. This is a surefire way, if you're talking about safety, to talk to your physician and then oftentimes be able to get a referral into occupational therapy. If you can say, I'm not sure what would we do in an emergency situation, he would
Mm,
be unsafe and unable to get out of his room, or
that's great.
unable to climb down the ladder, whatever.
Yeah.
Those are really good specific goals and reasons why an occupational therapist could be working with you. And if you mention that to the physician and then to your occupational therapist, you have a great starting point.
Yes, that's such a great point. Yes, because when we start talking about safety, people listen, right?
Yep, yep. Safety
So
is a key word Bentley, when I'm
it
talking to
is.
families about getting occupational therapy services. Safety.
Yes. And then another thing that I always like to add, I love sharing information. And then I always have all of these little caveats that I think of in my brain. Some of our kids have a hard time talking about emergencies or disasters. It might elicit some anxiety. And so, as a parent, and that's probably a whole nother podcast to go into, but just be alert to that as a parent. And if you need additional help, there's also help out there. So I think that's because we're talking about disasters with kids or emergencies. I always like to say, just be alert to that. It might be a tough topic, and get the help that you need.
Yeah, especially because even as we're mentioning this and you're saying people get to the monster and they're like, I don't know, I'm frozen. I don't know what else to
Yes.
do about if my child wouldn't be able to get down a ladder. And
Right.
that is scary for us. It's
Yes.
also scary for that child. So it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, that let's then work through those feelings too. And just because we're planning in advance doesn't mean that this is going to happen, but it means
Right.
if it does happen, that we are more prepared and that we're safe.
Yes. And I talk about this dance between planning as a parent and engaging the child. And I do, because my program is, a lot of it is aimed at teaching kids about their sensory patterns. There is a child's version of the planner on my website, and it looks very different. And for a child, they're just saying, oh, this might be tough. And then this is something that we can do about it. And that's also a free resource. So if that helps you as a parent lead them through it, by all means use it. It's not a standalone, because I think the adults need to have a plan. But if it
Mhm.
can be a tool, then it's there to use.
So great. And that's even working on flexible thinking and executive
Oh,
functioning in itself. So,
yeah.
guys,
Yeah.
I think this is like the best resource for everybody.
It's
Where
been
can
fun.
they find it?
So my website is brainexecutiveprogram.com. On the homepage, there's a few things that pop up. You can go to the Sensory Safe Evacuation Planner, but also under the Resources tab, it'll get you to, there's an option for that Sensory Safe Evacuation Planner. And also there, I've written a few articles. I've written one for clinicians. So if you're a clinician listening to this, there's an article from OT Practice that you can read.
I
There's
found you.
one. Yeah. There's one that I wrote for Autism Parenting Magazine that kind of explains this more to parents and caregivers. And I would say that if you have a child and they don't have an autism diagnosis, I think it can still be a valuable resource just to walk you through that planner. There also are the different versions of the planner which you can access, and so just some different resources. And if you go to the About page, it has my email address. And if this is something that you feel like is really important for your family and you're struggling with it, please reach out. Safe I am a big believer that safety is a human right and that we all have
Yes.
to work together to make sure that happens. If you get to a place where you feel like this is important and you just don't know where to go, please reach out because we can connect you to resources and do our best.
Thank you so much for being here and for discussing this really important topic with us.
Thank you for having me. This has been fantastic. And to share this, I would encourage your audience to share it because it's there, it's free, and it can only help people who know about it. So even if you feel like, I don't think this fits my family, but I like the way you're thinking, share it with your community, please, because the more it can literally save a life.
Yes.